Buongiorno, good morning. I'm delighted to be here today to moderate this panel on data with such a distinguished panel of experts. I'm Riccardo Masucci, Global Director of Privacy Policy at Intel, and one of the co-founders of the Cortina Digital Forum. We live in a data-intensive society. We share data through our connected devices. Data is also collected around us by sensors, in buildings, in vehicles. And also data is derived from algorithms, complex algorithms that are extracting meaningful information from data sets. The amount of data globally is growing exponentially every year. Data is spurring innovation across all the economic sectors of our society, from healthcare to agriculture to mobility, industry, education, and many more. Data involves both personal data and non-personal data, and data analytics is increasingly happening across the entire digital infrastructure, from cloud to edge devices. So in this current scenario, how can we enable innovative data processing while also protecting individuals and their data? How can we improve access to data that has commercial and industrial value? To this and other questions, we will try to answer with this discussion today. I have the honor and the pleasure to introduce you to all the speakers of this session. And I would like to start with Mr. Fabio Mattei, that I don't see on the screen now. I see directly Mr. Claudio Filippi from the Italian authority. Right, okay. There was a little change in the program then. We have the Deputy Secretary General of the Italian Data Protection Authority, Mr. Claudio Filippi, who also leads the investigative activity of the authority. Welcome, Claudio. Thanks for joining us today. We also have the pleasure to be joined today by Mr. Federico Milani, Deputy Head of Unit Data Policy and Innovation at the European Commission. Welcome, Federico. I have also the pleasure to introduce you to Francesco Bonfiglio, CEO of Gaia-X. Welcome, Francesco. And also Corinna Schulze, EU Director for Government Relations at SAP. Welcome, Corinna. We might be joined later in the session by Audrey Plonk, but we're trying to solve some technical issues. Audrey Plonk, Head of Division Digital Economy Policy at the OECD. But without further ado, let's get started with the first round of questions. And I would like to focus specifically on data protection and personal data and non-personal data. And I would like to start exactly from Mr. Filippi by asking, in an increasingly digitalized society, how important is privacy and the protection of individuals' data, and what role can data protection authorities play to achieve this goal?
Molto bene, ringrazio innanzitutto voi per l'organizzazione di questo evento. Purtroppo il dottor Mattei non potrà essere qui con noi questa mattina, quindi lo sostituisco fin dal primo modulo, in quanto vice segretario generale. L'importanza della questione che lei evidenzia riguarda espressamente la circolazione dei dati e la protezione dei dati, e questo può sembrare un ossimoro, un contrasto questo
may
nel
sound as an
modello
oxymoron
organizzativo di
or
chi
as a
protegge i
clash
dati e allo
in
stesso
terms
tempo
of the
vuole che vengano
organizational
messi in
model of
circolazione.
those who protect data
Non deve
and at the
trarci in
same time
inganno
wish them to be
questo
put
elemento,
around.
perché in realtà
This
proprio nel
element should not
regolamento noi
trick us
abbiamo i
because
riferimenti
within
per
the framework
comprendere
of
il
the set of
meccanismo.
rules
Il
we have
trattamento dei
references
dati
to
è espressamente
understand this
previsto che sia a
mechanism.
servizio
Data
dell'uomo.
processing
Quindi
is
la
really
circolazione delle informazioni è
for the benefit of
espressamente il
human
principio su
beings,
cui
and
si
therefore
fonda il regolamento
information
sulla protezione dei
circulation
dati
is the
personali.
principle upon
Questa
which we have
funzione
the set of
sociale
rules on the
ovviamente
approval of
è previsto che
personal
sia
data. The
contemperata
social
con
function
altri diritti
is
fondamentali,
coupled
in
with
quanto la
other
protezione dei dati
fundamental
è il
rights,
primo dei diritti
given that data
fondamentali
protection is the
citato e
first
richiamato
of
nel
the
regolamento stesso.
fundamental rights
E
that has
il
been
parametro di
mentioned in the
riferimento
set of
è
rules
l'elemento
themselves.
della
And the
proporzionalità, quindi
reference
ogni diritto
parameter is the
fondamentale
element
previsto
of
dagli ordinamenti
proportionality. So
è
each
messo
single
sullo stesso
fundamental
piano.
right within the
Facciamo
framework
alcuni
of
esempi. La
this
libertà di
legal
impresa
situation is on the
deve
same
essere
level. I'll give you a
contemperata
few
con la libertà
examples.
con il
Freedom of
diritto alla protezione dei dati
enterprise is
personali,
to
che
be
vuol dire
coupled
che se
with
io
the
devo
liberty of
aprire
protecting
un
personal data,
supermercato nella
which
città
means
di
that if
Roma,
I have to open a
vorrei
supermarket in
comprendere
Rome,
quali
I really have
flussi
to
di
understand
soggetti ci
more
sono in
about
quell'area per
flows
poter
of
meglio
people,
orientare
potential
dove aprire quel
customers, in order
supermercato. Quindi il mio
to be
diritto
able to
d'impresa
find the
rende
best
necessario avere il
suitable
diritto a conoscere
venue.
le
So, as an
informazioni in quel
enterprise, I
territorio
have the
circolano e
right
si
of knowing
muovono e
information
rendono la
locally of
potenzialità
that
economica di
particular
quel settore e
territory
quindi la
and makes
proporzionalità
that
mi consente di
territory
ottenere alcune
potentially
informazioni. In quel
good
caso
from
saranno
the
informazioni
economic standpoint. And
statistiche
this allows
aggregate,
me to
ma
get
per
some
conoscere il
information
fenomeno
like
della
statistic
circolazione
data
dei
or
dati
aggregate
e delle
data.
persone in
But
quell'area.
to
Altro elemento
understand
di
the phenomenon
compromesso e
of
di
the data
proporzionalità riguarda la
circulation and
libertà
people
di espressione,
circulation in that
la
area.
libertà di
The other
pensiero,
point has to
il
do
diritto alla vita
with
privata, alla vita
freedom of
familiare.
expression
Tutto
and
questo non deve
thought,
essere
the right to
compromesso
private
da
and
un
family
diritto
life.
assoluto alla
All this
protezione
should
dei
not be
dati e allo stesso tempo
compromised
al
by
diritto a
an absolute
conoscere le
right
informazioni per poter
for data
progredire in una
protection
società
and
democratica e
at the same
moderna.
time knowing
È chiaro
information
che
in order to
l'incremento
be able to make
transfrontaliero dei
progress
dati che
in a
lei prima
modern
citava
society.
non riguarda
The
soltanto i dati personali come
transborder
tali, come
increase of
soggetti
data
identificati,
not only
ma
has to
anche
do
i
with
dati non
personal data
personali.
in
Abbiamo il
terms of identified
recente
subjects,
regolamento
but also
18 del
non-personal data. In
1807 che è entrato in
2018,
vigore
the
il 28 maggio 2019 che rende possibile
1807
l'utilizzo delle informazioni non
set of rules
personali in relazione a quelle
implemented
che sono
in
invece le
May
informazioni
this year
personali, i dati personali
have
previsti
to
dal
do with
regolamento
personal and non-personal
679 del
data
2016
circulation
e
based
dal
on the
25 maggio 2018
set of
abbiamo
rules
un sistema
607
globale di
dated
protezione dei dati
216,
personali e
and
non
we have a
personali
global system of
nell'assetto
protection of
europeo.
personal and
Abbiamo
non-personal
poi però
data in
anche
Europe.
alcuni
Then
aspetti,
we
diciamo,
have also
innovativi e
a few
problematici di cui
aspects
magari
which
parleremo più
are
tardi
new and
nell'altro
maybe also
modulo,
maybe
ma
an issues
è evidente che qui
and
si
we
tratta
are
di
going to talk about
introdurre il
them
concetto
later
di
on
data
during the
governance
second
act,
session.
cioè
But
un
here we have to
sistema dove
introduce
l'uso delle
the
informazioni
concept of
personali per
data
essere a servizio
governance
dell'uomo
act,
deve essere
where personal
disciplinato correttamente.
information
E
must
ahimè,
be
non rilevo, ma in
suitably
questa
disciplined.
prima parte
And
io
alas,
le
I have to
evidenzio
say it
come molto spesso la protezione dei
and
dati personali
highlight
sia un
this
elemento
during this session
normativo
how
da temere
personal
in
protection
quanto
is
prevede delle
something
sanzioni
one
molto alte.
must
Io faccio l'esempio che
fear
all'entrata in
because
vigore
you have very
di
high
attuazione
sanctions ever
il
since
regolamento
we
del 25 maggio
enforced the set of
2018, il
rules
garante ha
dated May
applicato
25th,
67 sanzioni
2018.
per un totale
The
di
authority
76
applied
milioni di euro.
67
E questo per noi
sanctions for a total of
significa che
76
ad
million
oggi rimaniamo
euros. And
ancora
this
un
means for
trattamento
us
non
that to
corretto
date we
dei
still
dati
have an
personali da parte di
incorrect
soggetti pubblici e privati. Quindi
processing of
non è
personal
stato
data by both
colto in
public
pieno lo
and
spirito in
private
base al quale il sistema di
subjects.
protezione dei dati che si
In
fonda
other
sul
words, we
principio
haven't
di
grasped
accountability
the idea
consente ai titolari
founded on the
di
principle of
raccogliere e trattare
accountability to
correttamente i
protect
dati
data and
personali
therefore
senza
allows
tracce,
people to
lacciuoli e
collect
elementi
and
di autorizzazione all'uso
process
delle
personal
informazioni.
data without
In autonomia
hindering
il titolare del
the right
trattamento
of
sarà
using
chiamato
information.
a
So
disporre
the
delle regole
owner of this
di trattamento dei dati che
process
di volta in
will
volta
have
lui
to
potrà
abide
avvalersi.
to
L'esempio
processing
tipico è
rules. The
avvalersi
typical
attraverso un'icona
example is,
informativa
for
di un
instance,
consenso al
through
trattamento dati in quanto la
suitable
raccolta è
information,
corretta.
you
Ecco,
have
tutto
to have
questo
a
ancora
consensus in
non
terms
è
of data
entrato, non è
collection.
penetrato nella
Well,
nostra
all this
collettività
is
e
not
quindi ci
as
sono
yet
ancora moltissimi abusi.
been made pervasive in our
Approfondirò meglio più
society,
tardi
so
questi
there are
elementi.
still lots
Grazie.
of abuses. Thank you very much. That's all for the time being.
Thank you very much, Claudio, for for your introductory remarks, and I really appreciate the fact that you already mentioned some of the initiatives taking place at the European level, which is a perfect transition for me to ask a question to Federico Milani, and the question is the following, Federico. The European Commission has a very ambitious data strategy, which was presented last year by President von der Leyen, but that now DG Connect is translating into a number of legislative initiatives. Could you please walk us through some of the key concepts, new concepts like data altruism, for instance, that the European Commission is exploring? And can you also describe some of the most important initiatives and some of the new approaches that the European Commission is taking?
Thank you very much. Well, I can start by exactly telling what is the objective and the vision of the European Commission. So we want to develop our own way of accessing and exploiting and sharing data. And that one is by creating the right condition for people, companies, authorities to share the data in a secure and trust-creating manners. We want to build trust in data sharing and to ensure the fairness of the allocation of data among the various actors. We are not talking about only personal data here, but also non-personal data. So all the data that is created and generated by devices that has not a direct link with all the with an individual. This is done, and that has been announced rightly before the start of the pandemic, on February 2020. But already there, what we were stressing is the importance of the data for the economy and for the public good. And actually, the pandemic has demonstrated even further the necessity for sharing data and using the data and exploiting the data, both in the from the economic point of view, increasing then the competitiveness of European industries, but also from, as I was saying, for the public good, for having the possibility of developing better policies related to the public benefit and to the public good. What have we done so far, apart from launching the data strategy, which announced a number of legislative instruments, and also investments in the creation, for example, of data spaces, sectoral data spaces that will favor the access of data in a controlled manner, where data provider and data users will have a clear rules on how to share the data, on what they can do with the data that they are using or that they are acquiring. The first of these legal instrument that we've proposed is exactly going into that direction. It's the Data Governance Act, the regulation that we are that is currently under discussion both in Council and the European Parliament. The basic principle of the Data Governance Act is actually, first of all, to establish an environment of trust. By, for example, creating a new figures of data intermediaries, which is a neutral actors in the data sharing, and therefore it's putting in connection the data provider and the data users in such a way that all the rights of the data provider are fully respected. And at the same time, the data user will have the clear possibility and the clear notion of what he can do with that data. Within the Data Governance Act, we've got to also the promotion of the use of data held by the public sector. There are a number of data sets that is held by the public sector, which has got third-party rights. And a clear example would be health data or mobility data or statistical data, microstatistical data. In that case, what we want to do is that we want to have to give the possibility to, for example, researchers or innovator to have access to that data in a manner that will allow the rights of the person rights to be fully respected. And here, what we want to do is to promote the creation of access point where national authorities will have the possibility of providing information on how to access the data and provide that data, if possible, for example, through after the anonymization of that data. And finally, we also want to promote data altruism. We've seen through our public consultation that there are both from companies, but also individuals, the willingness in specific cases to grant access to their data and the data that they produce. One example would be, for example, for curing specific illnesses, or in going to a less contentious problem would be, for example, for me or for individuals to provide my mobility data to my municipality so that they will be able to develop a better and a better public transport systems that will be more suitable to my needs. And we've seen that in that case, for example, it's easier to donate organs because you've got a setup in place, a precise systems in order to grant the possibility, for example, to donate your organs, than having the possibility of donating your data. And there we want to tackle exactly this issue. We want to make sure that there will be the possibility for organization to become collectors of the data that companies or individuals want to donate, to provide access to, and make sure that those organizations will be fully respected, will fully respect the rights of the users. And we can continue the discussion later on. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Federico, for this very comprehensive overview. I would like now to turn the floor to Francesco Bonfiglio. Francesco, we heard European data spaces among the many initiatives that the European Commission is driving. Federico mentioned personal data, but also public data, and so there is a very broad set of data that could be processed, that could be stored, that could be accessed. To do all this, we need an appropriate infrastructure and services. And so, what is the Gaia-X project? What are their goals? What are its goals? And what are the approaches to data that Gaia-X is taking?
Thank you, Riccardo, and very glad to be part of this panel. And by the way, yesterday, Federico was also part of another panel of Gaia-X where we were discussing very interestingly data spaces. So how Gaia-X, what is Gaia-X and how Gaia-X is responding to these needs? Very simply, Gaia-X is a project to implement a new sovereign cloud that will enable like Federico said before, a trusted environment to let data circulate and really enable the market of data in Europe. And the ambition of Gaia-X is not just to create something for Europe, but actually to create a real alternative to the existing data infrastructures in a federated model. So it's an orthogonal, completely different model than the concentration models that we have seen in the last decades in the cloud environment. So in other words, we are building a software layer that will be capable to be plugged on top of existing clouds and infrastructures of existing European player or non-European player, that will provide a level of transparency and trust which is in compliance with the principles of Europe. This is important because we need to be aware that currently the level of adoption of cloud, and we are not talking about cloud for the sake of technology, we are talking about cloud because cloud is the only enabler of data economy. So without cloud, we wouldn't be talking about the possibility of sharing data and building a new economy on top of that sharing. So to have the right level of adoption of the cloud, we need to do something, because the current level of adoption in Europe and across all countries more or less is the same, is less than 25%. If we take off this 25, 26%, maybe in some statistics, if we take off the so-called software as a service, which is the one we are using today to hold this conference, and what we use in most cases, and we name cloud services, and we just focus on the infrastructure as a service. So that plumbery that allows for data to be managed and transferred and shared, that level of adoption is well below the 15%. Anyway, it's a small portion. If that is true, that means that 80% of our data are still managed in on-premises data centers or servers that are not enabled to be used for data sharing in a transparent and efficient and secure and sovereign way. So this is what GaiaX is building to enable, first of all, a large adoption of cloud and a large adoption of a new generation of cloud that is a federation of existing clouds. So the intent of GaiaX is building a new way to access data, reduce the barriers of adoption, which are mainly due to the fear of having a lock-in approach, because most of the cloud platforms today do not provide for interoperability and migration from one platform to another. So the cloud today and tomorrow will be hybrid, which means a mix of public and private cloud and also on-premises infrastructures. Will be multiple, so there will be a mix of cloud providers, and will be federated, which means it will be shared across computing nodes that are closer to where the data are produced. Now, let me just make one point about what I've heard before, because in order to enable an economy of data, and I'll pause just after this remark and reasoning I have made, we need to be aware of what are the obstacles that impeded or slowed down the adoption of data sharing, the creation of data spaces, and the flourishment of a data economy. We need to be aware that we had the GDPR Act in 2018, and exactly in the same year, there was a counterpart, which was the Cloud Act in the United States. So the data economy, the data platform economy, we need to be aware, is 70%, 75% American. There is a 15%, a 20% in Asia, and there is just a 5% owned by European platform. That means that almost 80% of the data is not in Europe. So the GDPR Act, as a matter of fact, created a further slowdown in the data economy enablement, because the GDPR clearly states how data should be protected, but not how data should be exploited. So there is high expectation from the industry, and GaiaX is the voice of the industry. We are a completely private association representing all the players from the market and society and academics. But the problem is that unless we have, and I hope this is the case through the Governance Act, a new set of rules that really tells how to use data, how to exploit data, we cannot enable a real data economy. So in other words, I'm really looking forward for the Data Governance Act to build these premises, which I understand are the right ones, because otherwise we will simply see the increase of the data we have available, but they will become more and more untapped data that we cannot use. So we need to have both the protection and the enablement of data usage, and as well as secure and trusted infrastructure to enable the safe flow. The combination of these ingredients will build a new economy of data. And that's what we are building in close collaboration with the GCONET, with all the European Commission and all the countries through the Gaia-X project. And pause here because there's a lot to say. I don't want to steal time to the other panelists.
Thanks a lot, Francesco. A lot of interesting suggestions and thoughts. And I would like actually to build on one of your remarks when you said that GDPR is somehow slowing down the enablement of the data economy. We understand that to be able to process data and to leverage the potential of the data economy, we need also regulatory environments that can foster this data processing. So Europe is really at the forefront of regulating data and finding data policy solutions. I'm asking to Corinna now, based on your experience from another voice from the private sector. What are the challenges in the implementation that you have seen and that you might see going forward?
Thank you very much, Riccardo. I'm very happy to be here today. It's really a very important and interesting discussion. And I can very much build on the comments that we've heard before. We certainly believe in the private sector that technologies such as AI and also cloud computing, as we heard today, bring many, many benefits. But having said that, we need to really balance this with the appropriate protection mechanisms and safeguards, not only because this is required by law such as the GDPR, but also because we believe that we really have to handle, especially also personal data in a responsible way. But we've also heard before that data protection is clearly a fundamental right, but it's also not an absolute right. We believe that we can achieve both innovation while protecting data protection or having data protection as a fundamental right, and vice versa. But having said this, as much as this is an element of human dignity, so are the rights to physical well-being, economic prosperity, and also that we need to excel in Europe in research and education. And I'm going to look at different possibilities going forward on how to balance that. We've certainly already heard today about Gaia-X and also the data spaces. I think this is certainly a community, an important community where industry and companies come together to move forward also in achieving this balance. But I wanted to also talk about some other initiatives. First of all, the idea of regulatory sandboxes. We find this very, very important. We already heard about the significant fine of the GDPR that we might be exposed. So we believe that of having regulatory sandboxes is very important. Key stakeholders come together. Privacy regulators, industry leaders, academics, and also partly members of civil society to exchange their views and share their experience and perspectives on important privacy, while obviously also looking at new technologies and seeing how we can move the needle there. So my first point is really, in addition to what we heard today, that regulatory sandboxes are a modern and suitable way and instrument to establish this dialogue and achieve the balance between technology innovation and data protection as a fundamental right. Another aspect we already heard today is the idea of accountability of companies and industry. To really think about, our own processes and how we can make them more data protection friendly and secure. And in this context, I also wanted to mention that many of our industries and companies are also really investing a lot in research on privacy enhancing technologies, and I think this is a very important aspect we shouldn't forget. Then another point are code of conduct. We hope that we will see the day of light for a cloud code of conduct that we are also a member of very soon, one of the first European codes of conduct. Just to mention that we also believe it's an important tool to keep in mind going forward. And last but not least, we also heard about the Data Governance Act. I also believe it's very important to establish a framework of trust, and we look forward to the further legislative process in that area. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Corina. Here again, several suggestions, and I hope we can pick on some of those also later. For now, I would like to draw the panel attention on another aspect of data policy, and I would like to actually shift and transition towards data access and sharing, trying also to discuss the economic value of data. More and more, we hear about the concept of data sovereignty, and actually, Francesco already made a reference to sovereignty in this context. The concept of data sovereignty is increasingly heard in public policy debates. We know that there are multiple drivers behind sovereignty, behind the idea of getting a better control over data. Reasons are multiple, as I was saying, so privacy, national security, but in many cases also government understands the importance of data to drive the economy, to drive competitiveness and growth, and so they also see a better control over data as an opportunity for local economic growth. The OECD, among other organizations, has looked closely at data and data flows, and trying also to find a correlation, find a link between data location and or data flows in terms of creation of value. Often the idea of data sovereignty is linked to data localization. So I would like now to start this second section of our conversation and discussion today, starting with Corina. And I would like to ask you, Corina, how do you see the importance of global data flows, considering also the global nature of our modern digital infrastructure?
Thank you very much, Ricardo. I was counting, on I think Audrey to kick it off, but I'll give it a try nevertheless. I think it's very, very important to remember that we live really in an interconnected world. And for this, the free flow of data is essential for international trade, and also global value chains. This is something we can really confirm, being a global company. So with our, being a business-to-business company, this is really essential that we have the possibility to exchange data around the globe with also to the benefit of our customers. So for us, it's really a prerequisite for any business operation in the digital age to be able to transfer data. It doesn't come as a surprise that we are, following with great concern any measures require data localization and restricting data flows, because again, we believe that this can cause a significant operational disruption for businesses and undermine economic growth. We have heard a lot on this front lately. There are obviously around the world, different governments are looking at the options that they have. It often starts obviously with the debate of personal data and to what extent this can be transferred. In the debate, I saw some finger pointing to the EU. Saying that with the latest trends to decision, that there was an element of data localization in it. In here, I would say that we read the judgment and the decision of the ACJ differently. We believe that certainly the court made it clear that when you transfer personal data, you need to have specific safeguards in place, and they put the bar higher. That's for sure than maybe to the extent we were used to. But having said that, they also clearly confirmed that standard contractual clauses are still valid. So in the discussions I heard lately, I certainly pushed back to say that all of a sudden the European Union started to take an approach towards data localization. But having said that, as I mentioned before, it is essential that the safeguards that are provided to data subjects under the GDPR travel with the data and are respected if data is sent around the globe, and the level of protection is not lowered through that. So having said that, I'm hopeful, Ricardo, that we still will see international data flows happening around the globe, and that also in this respect we will get the balance right, and don't fall into the trap of heavy data localization measures. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot to you, Corinna, and I hope also that the other speakers will provide more comments and their views on data localization. And for this reason, now I would like to turn to Francesco, as he mentioned in his previous intervention, trust and security as key to enable data sharing. Now we hear discussions around data localization. It seems that, Francesco, data location matters when it comes to data access and sharing. What is your view here, and how do you think that the European Cloud Federation is going to boost value creation for the European market? And is this measurable?
Yeah, let me start with data flows. Let me start with data flows because this is a very interesting point. So, what Gaia-X is about, for those that don't know Gaia-X or maybe are asking themselves why Gaia-X, Gaia is the goddess of prosperity, so we want to make a European economy of data flourish. And the X is interesting because if you want to remember what Gaia-X means you need to remember just one letter. At the top of the X, we have the data. At the bottom of the X, we have the infrastructure. And in the middle of the X, we have what we call federation services. The federation services are the core of the Gaia-X project, and it is what we are developing concretely in terms of software. And they are connectors between these two worlds. So if you see the data like water and different plumbery, it would make no sense to build a new plumbery, even with all the measures and the meters and all the possible gauges to control. There is no leakages, and there is a well-known in advance flow of the water if you don't have water. So Gaia-X is all about enabling data flows. This is the first point. The second point I wanted to make, and you touched upon it, is about the concept of sovereignty. Now, I'm pretty sure if you put 10 panelists around the table and ask all of them the very same question, how would you define sovereignty? I think you will get very different answers. I would not bet on the percentage, but I'm pretty sure you would get different answers. So my simple answer, and the simple answer of Gaia-X, is that sovereignty is simply the capability to have control on how your data are treated by whom, in what manner, where they go, where they stay, and what for they are used. It's basically no more than privacy, private control of your data and how they are treated. So in this sense, this is not just a European principle, but it's a universal principle. And then the sovereignty we are implementing is one of those federation services I was mentioning about. And to name a few, the federation services we are implementing are about identity management, about security, about interoperability, about portability of data, about sovereignty. So sovereignty means control of the access management. Let me then go back to the jurisdiction or location of the data. I have been in the business for more than 30 years. So this is my first role as a CEO out of the business and in an association. I'm very proud of it because this is a unique and unprecedented endeavor. And I really wanted to take this role because I think we can do something really useful for the business. But you need to be aware that the customers do not care too much about where their data is. They care about who is accessing their data, how their data is protected in the environment they put it in, and it might be in their urban area, in their country, in a regional area like Europe, or even outside of Europe, but they need to be aware of where those data are, how they flow, and who is touching them in what ways. So this is the most important thing. Another important thing to know is, like I said before, the world is becoming completely different. We used to see a world of hyper-concentration, the so-called hyperscaler model, where the most data, the most computing power, the most storage you can concentrate in a single spot, the more you are competitive. This world will need to radically change because now the model has to follow the data, and the data are spread across planet Earth. So the computing intelligence, the artificial intelligence, the storage capacity needs to be distributed as well, and therefore the data should stay as much as possible where they are produced. This is the concept I call, like in agriculture, you have to consume the goods as close as where they are produced. In digital, it's going to become the same thing. So the jurisdiction of where data are stored, the strict control of their location, it is an important and extremely important attribute and parameter to control, and it is one of those Gaia-X Federation services will allow to control. But in terms of transparency, not in terms of limitation, it will be not possible to build walls around the data because the data will grow like mushrooms in a bush. We are building with Gaia-X the technological infrastructure to enable this, to let this new trend of computing, data, intelligence distribution to become possible across a network of nodes. So to answer your question, yes, Gaia-X will enable an unprecedented layer of transparency to see where data are, and will enable also any data user to decide exactly where their data will be. But impeding the circulation of data would be simply impeding the digital evolution. And instead, we are building something that there's never been possible before, which is transparency on how data flows, where they are. It's like having a big switchboard where you have, a glass panel behind. So you switch and decide where your data goes and stays and who used them, but you see it through. This is what has never been possible before, simply because the model of hyperscale is orthogonal to the model of distribution. So I think this will be crucial, and I'll pause here to let time to the other panelists.
Thanks a lot, Francesco. I hope we will have also the opportunity to come back to some of these points. But now I would like to give the floor to Federico, because this concept of European data spaces has come up several times in our discussion today. And so I would like to ask you to spend a bit of time on this concept and some of the plans of the European Commission around European data spaces. And also I would like to ask you about the reuse of sensitive data. Among personal and non-personal data, we have also a subset that we can define sensitive, either because it's very personal, healthcare, finance, financial data. These are the typical examples. But also there is a type of data that is IP protected, or that is confidential from a business perspective. So how we can reconcile the need for access and sharing while protecting also this sensitive data?
Thank you very much. And as I was saying, and it has been already mentioned by the previous speakers, and especially by Francesco, the definition of data sovereignty that he has proposed, I think it's quite interesting, and I tend to agree with what he said. And actually, this is what also the European Commission is doing. What we want to do is to take an assertive approach in protecting the rights of the data producers. This is why there are a number of rules and regulations that probably we will hear afterwards on the GDPR, so that rights can travel with the data. So we are not advocating for localization of the data, but we want to make sure that if there are rights attached to the data, that also the rights of the data producers, both if it is personal data or if it is non-personal data, so confidential data that has got IPI rights, will be respected also when the data is transferred or it's shared. And this is one of the main aspects and one of the main important points that we also introduce in the Data Governance Act for non-personal data. Taking the example exactly of the GDPR and how the GDPR is treating this important point, which is coming again back from the discussion that we had. What we want to do in Europe is really make sure that the data producers will have the possibility to exploit the data, to share the data, but still to have full control of the data that he is producing. And this is because we think that there is an enormous values of in the values that the data of the data that is produced, and we need to favor the use of the data more than keeping the data by yourself or the company, where probably the data since it's not combined with other data, will not be able to create the value and the advantage, the economic value or the social value that it might have. And this comes back again to what you were saying before. What is the value of data? Well, the value of data, as everybody knows, it's not on per se, but it's on what you can do with that data. And this is why sharing the data is extremely important. The concept of data space is exactly going into that direction. It's not only infrastructure, as we've heard. It's not only technical infrastructure, so technology that allows the sharing of the data, or technology that allows the extracting information from the data through algorithms, through privacy-preserving algorithms that analyze the data without having the data moved from the data where the data is held and where the data is produced. But it's also a layer of a governance infrastructure where the various parties involved in sharing the data can set up a number of rules so that, again, as we were saying before, the rights of the various producers of the data is going to be respected. There are, of course, complications, because most of the time data is not only produced by a single organizations. And if you think about it, when you buy a car, especially the new connected car, or if you buy a smart fridge or a smart appliances, that appliance, that car will produce data. Data will be then therefore collected most of the time by the producers of the machinery, but it's data that it's by buying your car, you have generated by using that appliances. So again, there we are in a situation where the data is co-generated. And again, there, what we are going to look at, and we are looking currently, is to see who can have access to that data, who can have, and what can the person or the individual or the company can do with in this kind of specific settings where the data is co-generated. Again, that one is one thing that we haven't touched upon, and we are looking with the Commission, so that, again, we want to make sure that the data will be shared, and the value of the data will be shared in a fair way, using really not trying to get all the data concentrated in one single hands, and that the benefits of the use of the data will be only concentrated in one single on one single hands. These are the activities that we are going to do in the legislative process that we are carrying out. And then we are also going to support, as I was saying, the infrastructure and the creation of the data spaces, closely working also with Gaia-X and other organizations that are tackling these issues, so that data spaces in health, for example, or in agriculture, or in the manufacturing will have the possibility of starting to share the data in order to, again, create a data-driven economy that will really exploit the use of this data to create benefits and to have a more competitive industries at the global level. And I finish with that.
Okay, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Federico. I would like now to involve in the discussion Claudio, and I have a specific question regarding interoperability of databases. Based on your experience at the Data Protection Authority in Italy, Claudio, what's your view, and what are the challenges regarding interoperability of data spaces?
Thank you, Riccardo. I think this morning's exchange of information is extremely interesting. I mean, I come with experience of the Data Protection Authority in Italy. It's clearly that the approach of the Italian authority, like all European authorities, is that of protecting information wherever it is, by whoever it is used, and for whatever reason data processing takes place. Clearly, we deal with the use of personal data, and we verify that the owner does so consistently with the reference judicial system. But we do not overlook in the reference legal framework the position of public administrations. In Italy, for instance, given that it is not mandatory to define this, in Italy, the Italian law expressly foresees that data protection be applied also to public administration, and sanctions are foreseen when data processing does not take place correctly. And in Italy, also the Italian legislator, when he or she adopts legislative procedures that entail the management of personal data, must talk to the Italian authority. So the framework of guarantees is cross-boundary, and everything refers to our authority. So from this point of view, now we have a global setup in Europe where the homogeneity of this discipline sets that under the same set of rules, we have 446 million citizens. So in this respect, the responsibility of data protection authorities at European level is that of having a homogeneous tool to regulate the rules of the game, so to speak. And I wanted to talk about the Italian experience on this because it is special also to share these elements on the ideas of sharing and interoperability of systems. We introduced rules years ago, but things started working dynamically recently. Now we have a large database with the people who are resident in Italy, where all the data of citizens, where they are located ever since I was born to the day I die. Well, all these elements, all this data is inside this database, and they automatically update all Italian databases. So if I need to know, say, to notify a legal document where Claudio Filippi resides, I can have access to this database, and wherever I am, be it in Palermo or Genova, I will know exactly what the address is, which is the address. And automatically, when Claudio Filippi has a son or a daughter, that son or daughter is recorded into this database. And this means that all databases must be interoperable to avoid citizens to go and put information first in one place and then somewhere else. And this is the importance of data interoperability. And this is the importance of the concept of digitalization, not because we want to change data from analog to digital, but because data at this point can move in an interoperable manner in a much more modern way. I mentioned NPR because this is the first database that creates the concept of interoperability, but also the health electronic system, which in Italy has been introduced at regional level. It is clear that citizens move from one region to the next and also goes outside of Italy, and he or she requires treatment and or care based on what his record or her record is. So obviously this system must be interoperable, and the authority states this. The authority promotes the fact that I don't need to go around with, a toggle with my health information, but rather than wherever I am, I can have access to this record to be able to collect the necessary information to be treated in a hospital abroad, for example, wherever I am throughout the global territory, even though I reside in Rome. And this is an element of great modernization. Clearly, the main issue here is who has access to health information, who can use it, and the ways in which we can access such information, because obviously we need strong keys. Not everybody can have access to my information when he or she works in a hospital. Only those who are enabled to do so, because they have to care for me or treat me in any way, can have access to such data. Another aspect that characterizes the concept of interoperable databases or databases is what I have just mentioned, the record where all fiscal information resides, and all phenomena that concern citizens in their daily life have an economic element which is traced and tracked and stored into this fiscal record. And there are about 1 million users who get connected to this fiscal record, and 400 external bodies constantly connected to this data, plus all municipalities, which in Italy are 8,000, plus 150,000 intermediaries, all those who help citizens collect data, input data, or get information out of the fiscal system. This allows us to understand how interoperability can work, because obviously the fiscal record, the citizens' record, and the general public administration record are interoperable and provide information to citizens, but also to everybody. Last but not least, in agreement with what Mr. Milani said a while ago, which I totally share, I also wanted to talk about the economic value of data, which is not a value per se. It's value because it's enriched with a set of information. A personal piece of data can be profiled, so you collect all the information that characterize a certain individual, his or her behavior and features, and these become a value added because that information matched with other information becomes profiled information. A very targeted commercial ad can go to, because at that point I will know, what this person shops and how. So you can understand how precious the information contained into this fiscal database are. One of the authorities that does this at European level, i.e. collects information and processes it, is the National Statistics Institute, ISTAT, in Italy. In Italy, together with the Statistical National System, this system characterizes a system that acts on the basis of methods that are comparable at European level, so that all subjects that must provide data, because the Statistical National System obliges us to provide personal data. If I, for instance, need to receive statistical information, I, as a citizen, am forced to provide information, and I get a sanction if I do not provide the information I'm required, information, obviously, that's not sensitive. So this aspect allows us to understand how the statistical element puts together a series of information panels that layer modern society and allow us to understand how things are faring in the country through its citizens. And this on the basis of data that needs to be collected at individual level and at business level. So this is the value the Italian Data Protection Authority is counting upon in wanting to protect data. We do not try and avoid this information to circulate. In fact, we favor data transfer and data sharing, but with the idea of protecting this data from possible abuse, from possible access that had not been given, because if a citizen downloads information and sells it to third parties, well, this element in Italy is a crime, and so we have to check on that. We have very many individuals who had abusive access to data, despite they had all possibilities to correctly deal with that information. But obviously, if they're out of the legal framework in which they're in, the information obviously becomes abusively used. So this is very briefly the reference framework I wanted to talk about, and then obviously we can talk about how this data can be reused, because the authority, the Data Protection Authority, also checks that public and also private subjects publish certain information on their websites, also personal information. There's an obligation for this in some cases, and there is also a check on the correct use of that information as to to why they've been published. And this is very important to avoid frauds and abuses, because if my mobile phone is available so that I can be connected to control a data protection issue, obviously that phone cannot be used for spam or for advertising. So, the way I make a piece of data public doesn't mean that that piece of data can be used for everything. And this is a very important principle. Thank you very much, Riccardo, for your question.
Thank you, Claudio. And actually, I just noticed that a lot of questions came in through the platform from our audience. This is a proof of the fact that there were so many different issues and so many different opinions that were expressed that also helped triggering some questions from our audience. So I'm going to actually, I don't want to put anyone on the spot. So I will try to follow the order that I see on the screen. I will read a couple of questions, and then we can take it from there. So the first question that we received is about some of the best practices or actions taken so far to increase citizens' awareness regarding risks, but also regarding benefits of data use and sharing. Can I ask probably Federico to start, and then I will ask Francesco, Corina, and then again to Claudio on this question. If you have a comment on how to increase awareness of citizens. We spoke also about transparency earlier, so it might be an interesting aspect to explore. Thanks.
It's an extremely interesting aspect that we also are tackling in the data strategies in the data strategy, and we are perfectly aware that it's one of the issues and one of the problems that we have to tackle in order to improve first of all the knowledge and the benefit of data sharing, but also as it was said, the risk. We are going to launch a number of actions through the Digital Europe program that is upcoming, exactly to improve the digital skills of citizens, so that people will be much more aware of the data that they produce and how the data that they produce is used. But there are also a number of private initiatives or already initiatives that are going on at several levels. For example, for the personal data, it's extremely interested in a number of initiatives that are doing and software that is being developed by personal information management systems like mydata.org, where they are offering what could be called data vault for personal data, where users, individuals like me and you, citizens, can store their data and provide targeted access to that data to service providers. There are simple softwares that can be installed in your device, for example, phone, that will you to really have a better control of your data. Of course, this is still under development. The technology is there. What it's missing now is that more and more individuals will use such devices and such services to have a better control of that data, so that also major player will have to basically adapt their offer by using and by accessing to the individual data through this data vault. And this is one of the other activities that we are going to promote and to support. So I finish there because otherwise there will not be more time for other people to answer that questions. But we are doing something, and we will continue to do something in order to improve the knowledge of the data, how the data is used, and how to manage your proper the data that you are producing. Back to you.
Thanks a lot, Federico. Francesco, any comment on
Yes,
this question?
I think that the question was about how to increase citizens' awareness about risks and benefits of data sharing and data usage. Let me make a parallel, which is quite unfortunate, but everybody understands that. We are living an unprecedented time of pandemic crisis. And we are living now the phase of transition out of, let me say, an era of restrictions and lockdowns, and the need to define an exit strategy. So going back to normality, although it will be a new normal. So the same applies to data. I want to clarify what I said before. The GDPR clearly states what are the measures to keep control of the data. And when I said it does not yet provide a clear indication of how to use the data, I mean exactly the same. We cannot only have rules to protect, we need also rules to get back to normal life and circulate and have normal societal life. And this is true for data. We need to find a way to live together with potential attacks, with potential risks, because risk will not disappear. It is impossible to get rid of potential risks of breach, of attack, of data stealing, and all sorts of things that cannot be simply regulated by legislation. So to me, it would be important that a good communication is provided by the European Union, by the local government, through, let me say, a higher level of understanding and competence around these digital themes, because the risk is that people get scared about their data. They didn't care about their data so much that they gave out for free to anyone, simply checking a check mark in downloading a mobile app or accessing to a website. Most of the people didn't realize they were just simply giving out their data. The enterprises are reluctant to implement shared data economy because they are well aware of the risks of lack of transparency and sovereignty, and we are working on that. But we need to be careful in making the people aware of the benefit. I think the Data Governance Act is going in the right direction. Let me tell you why. First of all, building an environment of trust. So if we move the focus to the protection, so instead of trying to be scared of an invisible enemy, we build a trusted environment where everybody can feel safe. It's a first important step. The second is intermediaries. So having actors that can provide the necessary trust because they implement, trusted environments like GaiaX, simply speaking, again, provides confidence that we know how to treat these risks, and we can start living and making business in a more normal way. The third point was the use of public data. We have an enormous amount of data that can be used for the common good. And this is also in line with the data altruism. If people know that giving their data out for getting something back in terms of new services, better quality of life, less queues in the public offices, less traffic, less pollution, they will be more willing to give their data for the common good. Last but not least, let's not forget the economy of data is already there. So the reason we have this high concentration of data in a few players in the world is because those players were capable to provide an advantage. And in marketing, there is a very commonly known law that if you don't pay for a service or a product, you are the product. This is a well-known lesson by all the big players of data economy. I think we should start to tell the citizens that they don't have to be the product. They need to get a benefit, an economical advantage back of their data. As an example, we are living this pandemic, and I will pause after this consideration. Nobody now cannot understand the value of sharing medical records, of sharing data, clinical data, in order to accelerate the development of a vaccine, in order to accelerate the development of a therapy. And all of a sudden, the data spaces, the data sharing has become visible to all the world. Without data sharing, we wouldn't be able to talk today, we wouldn't be able to buy the grocery or the stuff we need on a wholesale platform. We wouldn't be able to talk with our loved ones. We wouldn't be able to send our children to school. We have realized in 1 year time that without data sharing and the control of our data, we will simply not be able to survive in the next era. So I think this is the right time to convey this message, and this message must be conveyed not just by private entities, but as well, and most importantly, by public, government, and institutions.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Francesco. I would like now to quickly turn to Corina and what the industry sector can do in increasing this awareness by citizens about risks and benefits.
Yes, thank you very much. I mean, we already heard a lot of very valid points. I just wanted to add here, as I mentioned, there are a couple of initiatives which are bringing together in different fora the stakeholders involved. And, you know, I think it's also crucial to bring along civil society to, you know, efforts like I mentioned, the regulatory sandboxes. But there's one additional point I wanted to add here, as obvious as this might sound. I think it's really crucial to also address schools and universities in this area. The earlier we start with creating awareness among the young people, also to alternatives, that one shouldn't always rely on just the systems that are out there, but that they can also, you know, come up maybe with their own solutions and really question also the technology and what is behind the technology and what is acceptable. I think that's really crucial, especially also with the idea of digital sovereignty. I haven't talked about that at all, but in this context, I think it's also really critical that we start as early as possible with young people in schools and universities, because these are the generations who can really have an impact also on questions like digital sovereignty. And I think then we manage to bring everybody along, then there will be also more trust in the technology going forward. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Corina. This leaves us maybe a couple of minutes for Claudio to add some comments here.
Thank you, Riccardo. I'll be very brief. Awareness is central. I totally share with what's been said. It's important to train people. We can't wait for just specific regulations and judges to decide what's wrong and what's right. Awareness also means active participation on the side of individuals to providing data and to checking that data is moving in the right direction. Let's give an example. When I get to a hotel, I sign a contract basically, and within that contract, I don't need consensus for data processing on the side of the owner of the hotel. He can advertise his company and he won't require any consensus. The hotel owner must send this data, my data, to the police. And so when I sign the contract with the hotel, I automatically know that the data I'm providing to the hotel is data that's going to be used by various people. So this is important. Through proper information, the owner of the data can decide the ways in which data is being processed and how this data can be shared and or used by himself, herself, or everybody. This is what I mean by real awareness, and it is on real awareness that we can create a more modern and more functional society. Thank you, Riccardo.
Many thanks to all panelists for your questions, for your answers, apologies, to this question coming from our audience. We received our other questions regarding cybersecurity, other questions regarding privacy-preserving technologies, but we are almost running out of time. So what I would like to propose here is that we have a final round of statements, a couple of minutes maximum each, possibly a little bit more than a minute. And I would like to challenge my panelists, asking just the most pressing action that needs to be done in the data policy space going forward. So I would like to start maybe this time by Claudio, and then we go to Federico, Francesco, and Corina.
The Italian Data Protection Authority carefully follows future developments, of course. This month, we have created an internal department to follow the developments in artificial intelligence, a huge challenge for modernity of the country itself, where the safety elements are obviously at the same level of economic development, knowledge through information, as we were saying before, and all this needs to be governed correctly, not just through specific rules. And the authority, therefore, wants to be the body that could, for example, certify algorithms concerning artificial intelligence, so that at least amongst public subjects, these tools can be used adequately, correctly, without obviously going against individuals or using the data of individuals in an incorrect manner.
Federico.
Well, there is a lot here to say, but just to simply say one single answer, one single sentence is with the Data Governance Act, we have looked in find ways to build trust in data sharings. Now, as I was mentioning before, we are looking at to ensure that there will be fairness in the allocation of the data value among the various actors. We are looking at both in the business-to-business data sharings, so looking, as I was saying, to the co-generated data, and we are also looking at in other aspects that we haven't talked, where is what happened when we are trying to share data between businesses and government. Is there ways there where we can improve the data sharing between business and government, especially for public interests. So again, in case of pandemics, we've seen through the initiatives that the possibility of accessing anonymized data of how citizens are moving will help us to predict how the pandemic will develop through a certain period. So this is another aspect that we are want to look relatively in the short time, so within 1 year, and try to come up with some legislative and policies that will support again the possibility of extracting the values, maximizing the values, and have a more competitive economy, but also the possibility of using data for the benefit of the society.
Thanks a lot, Federico. Francesco, one top priority for the next year?
I take two, but I will be very, very brief. So one is to let's start using European cloud services, European services in general, because I think that we need to be aware of the power of the technology we have in Europe, and we now need to be aware that not just European or Asiatic provider can give us all what we need. And the second top priority, I would say that I want to pick on the points that Federico made. I think we have one huge big data lake, which is untapped data, which is this public data that I hope will be found. The Data Governance Act will find a way to make them available, because these are one of those data spaces that can be used in many different ways to improve everybody's life. So I'm looking forward for a concretely adoptable anonymization that will let many players that are capable to do that to use those data to build new services, new transportation services, new schooling services, new healthcare services, improve all we have based on the data we already have, and simply today cannot be used without the risk of running into infringements or running into endless cycles of approval and consensus. That is exactly what the roadblocks I was talking about before. So maybe all citizens will see the value if we find a way to use their data for their good, for their common good.
Thanks a lot, Francesco. And now, Corina, you can close this final round of questions.
Thank you, Riccardo. I think we heard a lot about the different initiatives that are out there at a European level. So I think it's really, really important to continue to streamline this and join efforts as we're doing and bring the forces together. But my other point is we also see a lot of legislative proposals on the table right now. We talked a lot about the Digital Governance Act, but another important proposal that came out just this week is the draft AI regulation. So I would really hope that with all the different initiatives and legislative proposals that we manage to bring them together in a meaningful, balanced way, avoiding overlaps and contradictions in order to really have the right framework for Europe in place for a bright digital future. Thank you.
Thanks a lot to you, Corina, and I'm sure our colleagues later this afternoon will address the issue of artificial intelligence. There is a panel focusing on artificial intelligence later today. Allow me to thank all of you, distinguished panelists, for this discussion that I personally enjoyed, and I hope also our audience did. So a big virtual round of applause to you all. I would like also to thank our audience for their attention. And again, I hope everyone enjoyed this discussion on data policy and data strategies going forward, a critical topic for Italy and Europe, for their prosperity and for really creating opportunities for the entire population. Thanks a lot, everyone, for your attention.